In the vast darkness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that echoes through every corner of the galaxy. Compassion is the rarest element in the universe. While advanced species calculate the worth of life in profit margins and strategic advantages, measuring every breath against cold efficiency, one species stands apart, not for their technology, not for their weapons, but for their inexplicable willingness to save what others abandon. When the Zephyrian Empire's most prized genetic experiments were deemed failures and left to die in the sterile corridors of a research station, the galaxy expected silence. What they got instead was the furious roar of human defiance and the beginning of a legend that would reshape the very foundations of interstellar civilization. This is the story of Dr. Elena Vasquez, a woman who looked into the dying eyes of alien hatchlings and saw not failed experiments but children who deserved to live. It is the story of how humanity's greatest strength, their refusal to abandon the innocent, would turn the galaxy's most feared predators into their most loyal allies and prove that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can topple empires. 442b had been silent for 3 days when the human medical frigate Hippocrates dropped out of hyperspace into the system's outer rim. Doctors, Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the observation deck's reinforced viewport, watching the spinning metal cylinder grow larger against the backdrop of the amber gas giant it orbited. Something was wrong. The station's external lights flickered in an erratic pattern, and several docking bays showed signs of hasty evacuation. Airlocks hung open like gaping wounds, and debris floated in lazy spirals around the structure. "This doesn't feel right," muttered Captain Torres as he joined Elena at the viewport. The grizzled spacer's weathered hands gripped the rail, his knuckles white with tension. Zephyrian research stations don't just go dark. They're too paranoid about their precious experiments. Elena adjusted her medical scanner, its soft blue glow reflecting off her dark eyes. At 34, she had seen enough alien physiology to fill several medical journals, but something about this mission felt different. The Zephyrian Science Collective had specifically requested human medical assistance, a request that would have been unthinkable just a year ago, before the Terran Medical Corps had proven their worth during the plague outbreak on Centauri Prime. "Maybe that's exactly why they called us," Elena replied, watching a piece of twisted metal tumble past the viewport. "When you're dealing with something beyond your understanding, you call the species that specializes in impossible cases." The communication array crackled to life, filling the observation deck with static before a strained Zephyrian voice emerged. The translator software struggled with the rapid-fire clicks and whistles of their language, but the desperation was unmistakable. "Human vessel, this is Research Director Kethvar. We have complications. The project has been terminated. All personnel are evacuating immediately. Your assistance is no longer required." Captain Torres reached for the communication panel, but Elena grabbed his wrist. She had heard something in the alien's voice that the translator couldn't convey, a tremor that spoke of guilt rather than relief, fear rather than satisfaction. "Director Kethvar, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez of the Terran Medical Corps. We've traveled 17 light-years to provide assistance. What is the nature of your emergency?" The silence stretched for nearly a minute before the Zephyrian responded. "Dr. Vasquez, the situation is resolved. The experimental subjects have been deemed non-viable. Termination protocols are in effect. Please return to human space immediately." Elena felt ice form in her stomach. In her years working with alien species, she had learned to read between the lines of diplomatic language. Non-viable subjects and termination protocols could mean only one thing. They were killing whatever they had been experimenting on. "Captain, dock us at Bay 7, she ordered, already moving toward the medical bay. "Full emergency response team." Torres hesitated. "Doc, they told us to leave. The Zephyrians aren't exactly known for their patience with humans who ignore direct orders." Elena paused at the hatchway, her medical bag already in hand. "Tell me, Captain, what's the first rule of the Hippocratic Oath? Do no harm? Close. First, do no harm." But there's an older version that says, I will remember that I do not treat a fever chart, a cancerous growth, but a sick human being. Today I'm expanding that definition. The docking procedure took 20 precious minutes. Elena used the time to assemble her team. Dr. James Okafor, her xenobiology specialist, Nurse Sarah Chen, who had an uncanny ability to calm frightened patients regardless of species, and medical technician Rodriguez, whose steady hands had saved countless lives in crisis situations. As the Hippocrates connected with the station's docking clamps, Elena felt the familiar pre-mission adrenaline surge through her system. The station's artificial gravity was failing. Elena's team moved through corridors that alternated between normal gravity and uncomfortable weightlessness, following their medical scanners toward the source of the faint life signs they had detected during approach. The walls bore scorch marks from plasma weapons, and more than once they had to navigate around sealed blast doors. Whatever happened here, it happened fast, Dr. Ed Okafor observed, his scanner painting ghostly green shapes in the dim emergency lighting. Looks like they tried to contain something. The life signs led them deeper into the station's core, past laboratories filled with shattered equipment and computer terminals that flickered with corrupted data streams. Elena's medical scanner began picking up increasingly concerning readings. Elevated stress hormones, irregular neural activity, and most disturbing of all, the biochemical markers of extreme pain. They found the source in Laboratory Complex 7. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the blast doors cycled open, revealing a massive chamber that had once been a pristine research facility. Now it looked like a war zone. The floor was littered with broken incubation pods, their nutrient fluids mixing in rainbow-colored puddles. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the walls, highlighting scratch marks that looked suspiciously like claw marks. But it was the sound that made Elena's blood run cold. A weak, mewling cry that could only be described as the universal language of suffering young. "Dear God," whispered Nurse Chen, her medical scanner trembling in her hands. "Are those eggs?" In the far corner of the laboratory, partially hidden behind an overturned research table, lay a cluster of oval-shaped objects roughly the size of human infants. They were a deep emerald green with veins of gold running through their shells, and they pulsed with a faint inner light. Several had cracked open, revealing creatures that defied easy description. Elena approached slowly, her medical scanner confirming what her eyes could hardly believe. The hatchlings were roughly humanoid in shape but covered in scales that shifted color with their emotions, currently displaying deep blues and purples that she instinctively recognized as distress colors. Each had 4 arms ending in delicate claws, large golden eyes that tracked her movement, and small wing buds protruding from their backs. "Dragons," she breathed, remembering the legends from Earth's mythology. "They're actual dragons." Dr. Okafor's scanner beeped urgently. "Elena, their life signs are critical: severe dehydration, malnutrition, and," he paused, running additional scans, "they've been exposed to some kind of neural suppressant. Their brain activity is being artificially dampened." One of the hatchlings, smaller than the others, lifted its head toward Elena. Its golden eyes were clouded with pain, but she could see intelligence there, a desperate pleading awareness that struck her like a physical blow. The creature opened its mouth and made a sound that was part whistle, part song, a complex melodic pattern that seemed to convey meaning beyond words. "It's trying to communicate," Elena realized, kneeling beside the dying hatchling. "Dr. Okafor, start preparing IV solutions. Sarah, I need you to check the others. Rodriguez, scan the laboratory, find out what they were doing to these creatures." As her team sprang into action, Elena gently placed her hand near the small dragon's head. The creature's scale shifted from purple to a tentative yellow-green, and it managed to lift one tiny clawed hand toward her fingers. "I know you're scared," she whispered, not knowing if it could understand her words but hoping it could sense her intent. "But I'm going to help you. All of you." Rodriguez's voice came from across the laboratory, tight with anger. "Doc, you need to see this." Elena reluctantly left the hatchling and crossed to where Rodriguez stood before a bank of computer terminals. The screens displayed what appeared to be research data, but the content made Elena's stomach churn. Project Sovereign, Rodriguez read from the screen, genetic modification of draconic species for enhanced combat effectiveness and absolute loyalty conditioning. Subject batch Alpha 7 through Alpha 1-2 show signs of independent thought and resistance to neural conditioning. Recommendation: immediate termination and disposal. They were trying to create living weapons, Dr. Okafor said, his voice hollow. Intelligent creatures bred for war and programmed to be slaves. Elena felt rage building in her chest, a cold fury that she rarely experienced but recognized as the emotion that drove her to become a doctor in the first place. These weren't failed experiments. They were children. Alien children who had been tortured and abandoned because they refused to become tools of war. "How long do we have?" she asked, returning to the small dragon who was now struggling to breathe. At their current rate of deterioration, maybe 6 hours. "Doctor!" Okafor replied grimly. "And that's if we can figure out their basic physiology fast enough to provide proper treatment." Elena looked around the laboratory, taking in the scope of what they faced. 12 dying hatchlings, an alien physiology she'd never encountered before, and somewhere in the station, Zephyrian forces who had already written these creatures off as acceptable losses. "Then we work fast," she decided, "and we don't leave anyone behind." As if in response to her words, the small dragon's eyes brightened slightly, and its scales shifted to a warm gold color. Across the laboratory, the other hatchlings began to stir, their melodic communications growing stronger as they sensed hope for the first time in days. Elena Vasquez had made a career out of saving lives that others deemed beyond saving. Today, she would discover that sometimes the most important patients were the ones the universe had already given up on. But first, she had to keep 12 dragon hatchlings alive long enough to prove that some bonds transcend species, and that compassion could bloom even in the sterile corridors of a research station where nightmares were born. The real work was just beginning. Elena's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she established the first IV line. The small dragon hatchling scales shifting from distressed purple to cautious yellow as the life-giving fluids began flowing into its system. The creature's physiology was unlike anything in her medical databases, but years of xenobiology training had taught her to look for patterns, to find the common threads that connected all living beings. "Their circulatory system is fascinating," Dr. Okafor reported from across the laboratory where he was examining another hatchling. "Dual hearts, one for oxygenated blood and another for what appears to be a specialized neural fluid. That explains the golden veins we can see through their scales." Nurse Chen worked with quiet efficiency, her gentle touch seeming to calm even the most distressed hatchlings. Elena watched with admiration as Sarah approached each dragon with the same careful compassion she showed human children, speaking in soft, soothing tones even though the creatures couldn't understand her words. "The neural suppressant is the immediate threat," Elena observed, studying the readings on her medical scanner. "It's not just dampening their brain activity, it's actually preventing their bodies from processing nutrients properly. No wonder they're starving." Rodriguez had been analyzing the Zephyrian research data, his expression growing darker by the minute. According to their files, the suppressant was designed to prevent the development of what they call aberrant personality traits, basically anything that would make the dragons think for themselves or form emotional bonds. The smallest hatchling, the one Elena had first approached, suddenly made a complex series of musical sounds. The other dragons responded immediately, their own vocalizations creating a hauntingly beautiful harmony that seemed to fill the laboratory with something approaching hope. "They're singing to each other," Elena realized, watching as the scales of all 12 hatchlings shifted to warmer colors. "It's some kind of group communication. Look at their neural activity. It's increasing when they sing together." Dr. Okafor's scanner chimed with an alert. "Elena, the neural activity spike is actually counteracting the suppressant. Their own biological responses are fighting the chemical conditioning." Elena felt a spark of inspiration. She moved to her medical kit and began preparing a neural stimulant, carefully calibrated for alien physiology but designed to enhance the natural processes she was observing. If their own communication is breaking down the conditioning, maybe we can amplify that effect. As she administered the stimulant to the first hatchling, Elena found herself humming softly, an old lullaby her grandmother had sung to her decades ago. The dragon's large golden eyes focused on her with startling intensity, and its scales shifted through a rainbow of colors before settling on a warm amber that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the melody. "Incredible," breathed Dr. Okafor. Its brain activity is normalizing faster than anything in the medical literature would suggest possible. Nurse Chen had moved to comfort a larger hatchling whose wing buds were partially developed. As she gently examined the delicate membrane structures, the dragon began producing a different kind of vocalization, deeper, more complex, with harmonic overtones that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Older, I think. And look at these wing structures. They're not just decorative. I'm reading air sacs and muscular development that suggests these creatures are meant to fly. Elena's mind raced as she moved from patient to patient, each hatchling responding to her touch and the sound of her voice. The Zephyrians had tried to reduce these magnificent creatures to living weapons, but they had failed to account for the most fundamental aspect of intelligence, the need for connection, for belonging, for love. The laboratory's blast door suddenly hissed open, and Elena looked up to see 3 tall insectoid figures in environmental suits stride into the chamber. The Zephyrians moved with the predatory grace of natural hunters, their compound eyes glittering behind their helmet visors as they took in the scene. Dr. Vasquez, the lead figure, spoke through a translator unit, his voice carrying the characteristic clicking harmonics of his species. "I am Research Director Kethvar. You were instructed to leave this facility." Elena stood slowly, positioning herself between the Zephyrians and the hatchlings. Behind her, the dragons had gone silent, their scales shifting to deep protective blues and grays. "Director, these creatures are critically injured. As a medical professional, I cannot abandon patients who require immediate care. These are not patients," Kethvar replied coldly. "They are failed experimental subjects scheduled for termination. Their genetic modifications have been deemed unstable, and they pose a potential security risk to the collective." Dr. Okafor stepped forward, his medical scanner still active. "Failed how? According to our readings, these are healthy, intelligent beings. The only thing wrong with them is that someone poisoned them with neural suppressants."
The second Zephyrian, smaller but carrying more elaborate insignia, spoke up.
"The subjects demonstrated unacceptable levels of individual consciousness and emotional bonding. They refused to respond to loyalty conditioning and showed aggressive protective behaviors toward their clutchmates. Such traits are incompatible with their intended military applications." Elena felt her anger rising, but she forced herself to remain calm. "So you decided to kill them because they cared about each other? Because they wouldn't become mindless weapons?"
"The collective's resources are not infinite," Kethvar replied. "Failed experiments must be terminated to make room for successful ones."
This is basic scientific methodology. Behind Elena, the smallest hatchling made a soft, questioning sound. She turned to see it struggling to stand, its large eyes fixed on the Zephyrians with unmistakable fear. Without thinking, Elena knelt and gently scooped the creature into her arms. It was heavier than she expected, but warm and surprisingly solid. Its scales immediately shifted to golden hues, and it pressed against her with obvious trust. "Look at them," she said, addressing all 3 Zephyrians. "Really look, these aren't failed experiments. They're children. They're scared, they're hurt, and they're clinging to each other for comfort because they know you want to kill them." The third Zephyrian had been silent until now, but something in Elena's voice seemed to affect him. "Doctor, you do not understand the complexities of our situation. The dragon species is extinct in the wild. These creatures represent our only successful genetic reconstruction of their genome, but they cannot be allowed to develop into uncontrolled adults." Elena's mind reeled. "Extinct? You're telling me these are the last dragons in the galaxy?" "The wild draconic species was eliminated during the Hegemony Wars 3 centuries ago," Kethvar explained with clinical detachment. Their homeworld was sterilized to prevent their use as weapons by enemy forces. We recovered genetic samples and have spent decades attempting to recreate them for military purposes. The weight of this revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. She was holding what might be one of the last dragons in existence, a creature whose entire species had been wiped out by the same kind of thinking that now threatened these hatchlings. But they're not just weapons, she said, her voice rising with emotion. They're a species with their own right to exist. They have emotions, they communicate, they care for each other. How can you just throw that away? Nurse Chen, who had been quietly monitoring the other hatchlings, suddenly spoke up. Doctor, you need to see this. Elena turned to see what Sarah was pointing at. The larger hatchling, the one with more developed wings, had moved to protect the smaller ones. Its scales had shifted to an intense crimson, and its posture was unmistakably defensive. But what made Elena's breath catch was the expression in its eyes. Not animal fear, but intelligent, calculated courage. It's protecting them. Doctor sighed. Okafor observed in wonder. It knows we're arguing about their fate, and it's trying to shield the others. The protective hatchling suddenly opened its mouth and produced a sound Elena had never heard before, a deep, resonant note that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull. The sound was answered immediately by similar calls from elsewhere in the facility, distant but unmistakable. Kethvar's compound eyes widened in alarm. Impossible. All subjects were accounted for. Were they? Elena asked, realization dawning. How many dragons did you actually create? The uncomfortable silence from the Zephyrians was answer enough. Rodriguez, who had been monitoring the station's internal sensors, looked up from his equipment with excitement. I'm reading multiple groups of life signs throughout the facility, he reported. Looks like some of the hatchlings escaped during whatever happened here 3 days ago. The protective dragon called out again, and this time the response was closer, more urgent. Elena could hear movement in the corridor outside the laboratory, the sound of claws on metal and the whisper of scales against bulkheads. They're coming for their family, Elena realized, looking down at the small hatchling in her arms. Its scales had shifted to a brilliant gold, and its eyes were bright with hope. They're trying to rescue each other. Kethvar reached for a weapon at his belt, but Elena stepped forward, still cradling the small dragon. Don't. If you start shooting, you'll only prove that they were right to fear you. The blast doors hissed open again, and Elena's heart nearly stopped. 3 adult dragons filled the doorway, their scales shimmering with iridescent patterns that spoke of health and freedom. They were magnificent, easily 8 feet tall when standing upright, with fully developed wings that sparkled like stained glass windows. Their eyes held the same intelligence she had seen in the hatchlings, but tempered with the wisdom and wariness of creatures who had learned to survive. The largest of the adults fixed its gaze on Kethvar and spoke, not in the musical tones of the hatchlings, but in perfectly clear Galactic standard. Release our children, it said, its voice carrying harmonics that made the words seem to echo from everywhere at once. They have committed no crime except refusing to become your slaves. Elena stared in shock. The dragons weren't just intelligent, they were fully sapient, capable of speech and complex reasoning. The Zephyrians hadn't just been trying to create living weapons, they had been attempting to enslave an entire species. Kethvar raised his weapon, but his hands were shaking. You were all supposed to be terminated. How did you escape the facility lockdown? The adult dragon's scales shifted to a pattern that somehow conveyed both sadness and determination. We are the survivors of a species you thought extinct. We have learned much about hiding, about enduring, and about protecting what matters most. Your locks and barriers mean nothing to creatures who have spent 3 centuries learning to survive in a galaxy that wants us dead. Elena looked from the adult dragons to the hatchlings, understanding flooding through her. The failed experiments hadn't failed at all. They had succeeded beyond the Zephyrians' wildest expectations. They had developed not just intelligence and emotion, but the most powerful force in the universe, the unbreakable bond between parent and child. The small dragon in her arms reached toward the adults with obvious joy, and Elena realized she was witnessing something extraordinary, not just the rescue of abandoned children, but the reunion of a family that refused to be destroyed by the cruelty of others. The real question now was whether the galaxy was ready for the return of the dragons. The standoff in Laboratory Complex 7 stretched taut like a wire about to snap. Elena could feel the tension radiating from both sides. The Zephyrians with their weapons drawn, fingers hovering over triggers, and the adult dragons whose scales had shifted to warning patterns of deep red and black. Between them, the hatchlings huddled together, their musical communication growing more urgent as they sensed the danger. The largest adult dragon who had spoken with such authority moments before took a careful step forward. Elena noticed that despite its imposing size and obvious capability for violence, the creature moved with deliberate restraint, keeping its claws retracted and its wings folded. "I am Keeper Thaindor," the dragon said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Elena's bones. "I speak for the remnant, those of our people who survived your species' attempt to erase us from existence. These hatchlings are under our protection." Kethvar's translator crackled with static as his agitation increased. "Impossible. The dragon species was confirmed extinct. Our genetic reconstruction program worked from scattered DNA samples. You cannot be survivors." A bitter sound emerged from Thanador's throat, something that might have been laughter if it weren't so filled with pain. "Your science excels at destruction but fails at understanding. We did not all die in your wars. Some escaped to the void spaces between stars, to dead worlds and forgotten systems. We have been watching. We have been waiting." Elena felt the small hatchling in her arms grow heavier as it relaxed into sleep, its scales shifting to soft blues and purples. The simple act of being held, of being safe, had allowed the exhausted creature to finally rest. Around the laboratory, the other hatchlings were also showing signs of recovery as Dr. Okafor's medical interventions took effect. "Director Kethvar," Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension. "These creatures are not just your property to dispose of. They're sapient beings with rights under the Galactic Accord on Sentient Species." "The Accord does not apply to genetically reconstructed species," the second Zephyrian interjected. "They are technically artificial life forms created using collective resources." Thanador's scales flashed bright crimson. "Artificial? We breathe. We think. We love our children and mourn our dead. What makes us less real than you, insect?" Elena saw Kethvar's grip tighten on his weapon and stepped between them again. "This isn't about artificial versus natural," she said firmly. "It's about consciousness and suffering. These hatchlings are capable of both. That makes them individuals deserving of protection, regardless of how they came to exist." Nurse Chen, who had been quietly monitoring the recovering hatchlings, looked up from her medical scanner. "Doctor, I'm reading some unusual neural activity from the group. It's almost like they're linked somehow." Thaindor turned his massive head toward Sarah, and for a moment his threatening posture softened. "Your healer speaks truly. We are bound by the song, the shared consciousness that connects all of our kind. When these young ones were tortured with your suppressants, we felt their pain across the void. That is how we found them." Elena's scientific mind raced with implications. A telepathic connection? That's why the hatchlings' condition improved when they sang together. They were drawing strength from each other. "And from us," added another adult dragon, stepping into the laboratory. This one was smaller than Thanador, but carried itself with obvious authority. "I am healer Saren Nai. These little ones have been cut off from the song for too long. Without our guidance, they will not develop properly." Elena looked down at the sleeping hatchling in her arms, understanding dawning. They're not just physically sick, they're spiritually isolated. The neural suppressants weren't just preventing individual development, they were cutting them off from their entire species. "A crime beyond measure," Saranai confirmed, her scales shifting through sorrowful grays and blues. "To sever a dragon from the song is to condemn them to madness and death." Yet these brave younglings fought against the silence, refused to surrender their connection to each other. Dr. Okafor had been scanning the adult dragons with growing amazement. "Their neural complexity is off the charts," he reported. brain activity that suggests not just individual intelligence but some kind of distributed processing capability. They're sharing thoughts in real time. Kethvar's weapon wavered as the implications sank in. If they are truly connected across interstellar distances, then killing these specimens will accomplish nothing. The adults will simply create more. You understand nothing, Thandor growled. We do not create our children as you create your machines. These hatchlings are not replaceable experiments. They are unique individuals with their own songs, their own gifts to contribute to our people. Elena felt a sudden shift in the small dragon's weight and looked down to see large golden eyes regarding her with alert intelligence. The hatchling reached up with one tiny clawed hand and touched her cheek, its scales shifting to warm amber. What is it saying? Elena asked, sensing meaning in the gesture. Saranai approached carefully, extending her own clawed hand toward the hatchling. The little dragon reached out and briefly touched the adult's scales, and both creatures' bodies flickered with shared patterns of light. She says the human healer has a good song. Saranai translated, wonder in her voice. She feels safe with you, protected. This is unprecedented. Our young have never bonded with another species before. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as the hatchling settled more comfortably in her arms, making small, contented sounds. Around the laboratory, the other recovering dragons were watching the exchange with obvious interest, their scales displaying curious yellows and greens. Rodriguez, who had been monitoring the station's external sensors, suddenly spoke up with alarm. "Doctor, we've got incoming ships. Zephyrian military vessels, at least a dozen of them." Kethvar's compound eyes clicked in satisfaction, the collective's response to our emergency signal. These creatures will be contained or destroyed before they can threaten galactic security. Threaten? Elena stood up, still cradling the hatchling, her voice rising with indignation. The only threat here is your species' inability to see intelligence that doesn't serve your purposes. These dragons haven't hurt anyone. They're trying to save their children. Thandor's scales had shifted to battle patterns. Deep blacks shot through with veins of silver. "How many ships?" he asked Rodriguez. 12 frigates and a dreadnought, Rodriguez replied grimly. "They'll be in weapon range in 15 minutes. Elena's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. The dragons were clearly capable of defending themselves. The adults moved with the fluid grace of natural predators, and their connection to each other suggested tactical capabilities that would be difficult to counter. But they were also vastly outnumbered, and any conflict would likely result in the deaths of the hatchlings she had worked so hard to save. "There has to be another way," she said, looking between the dragons and the Zephyrians. "Some solution that doesn't end in violence." Saranai tilted her head, studying Elena with those large, intelligent eyes. "You would stand between us and those who would destroy us? Even though we are not of your species? These hatchlings are my patients," Elena replied firmly. "It doesn't matter what species they are. I took an oath to preserve life, to ease suffering wherever I find it. That includes protecting them from those who would harm them." The third Zephyrian, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly stepped forward. "Dr. Vasquez, perhaps there is an alternative to destruction." Kethvar whirled on his subordinate. "Science Director Veltar, you exceed your authority." "No," Veltar replied calmly, removing his helmet to reveal the scarred features of an old researcher. "I invoke Article 12 of the Scientific Accord. Protection of unique research opportunities. These creatures represent the only surviving members of a species thought extinct. Their destruction would be an irreplaceable loss to galactic science." Elena saw opportunity in the scientist's words. "Exactly. Think of what we could learn from them, about consciousness, about interspecies communication, about the development of telepathic abilities. The medical applications alone could revolutionize treatment of neural disorders across a dozen species." Thanidor's scales shifted through rapid color changes as he consulted with his companions through their shared song. Finally, he turned back to the humans and Zephyrians. "We propose an exchange," he said formally. "We will share our knowledge freely." our understanding of genetics, of neural development, of the consciousness that connects all living things. In return, our children will be recognized as free beings with the right to exist without persecution. Ayla held her breath as Kethvar considered the offer. Through the laboratory's speakers, she could hear the distant rumble of approaching ships, and she knew that whatever decision was made in the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of 12 hatchlings, but possibly the future of human-dragon relations. The small hatchling in her arms made a soft musical sound and pressed closer to her chest. In that moment, Elena realized that whatever happened, she would not abandon these creatures. They had shown her something she had never seen before. A species that valued connection over conquest, love over logic, and the welfare of their children over their own survival. The question now was whether the galaxy would prove worthy of such trust. The Zephyrian fleet hung in space like a constellation of death, their weapons charging with ominous energy signatures that Rodriguez monitored with growing alarm. Elena could feel the tension radiating through the research station as both species prepared for what might be their final confrontation. Fleet Admiral Zekthor is demanding immediate surrender of all dragon specimens, Captain Torres reported through the communications system, his voice tight with stress. He's threatening to destroy the entire station if we don't comply within 10 minutes. Elena looked down at the hatchling in her arms, its scales now a deep blue that she had learned indicated fear. Around the laboratory, the other young dragons had instinctively clustered together, their musical communications creating a harmony that spoke of courage despite terror. Thanador's massive form moved to the laboratory's central view screen, his claws extending to interface directly with the station's communication array. "This is Keeper Thanador of the Dragon Remnant," he spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the void to the waiting fleet. "I request parley with your commanding officer." The view screen flickered to life, revealing the angular features of a Zephyrian admiral whose compound eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. "I am Fleet Admiral Zekthor. You will surrender immediately or face total annihilation. The collective does not negotiate with escaped experimental subjects." "We are not subjects," Thanador replied with dignified calm. "We are the survivors of a species you attempted to genocide. These hatchlings are our children, not your property." Zekthor's mandibles clicked in dismissive laughter. "Survivors? Impossible. The dragon homeworld was completely sterilized during the hegemony wars. No life could have escaped that level of planetary bombardment." Elena saw an opportunity and stepped forward, still cradling the small dragon. "Admiral, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez of the Terran Medical Corps. These creatures are demonstrating capabilities that could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness and interspecies communication. Their destruction would be a catastrophic loss to galactic science." "Humans," Zekthor spat, his voice filled with contempt, "always meddling in affairs that do not concern them. These creatures are dangerous weapons that must be controlled or eliminated." The hatchling in Elena's arms suddenly lifted its head and made a complex series of musical sounds. Elena felt rather than heard the communications spread throughout the station, carried by harmonics that seemed to resonate through the metal itself. Around the laboratory, the other hatchlings responded with their own songs, creating a symphony that grew stronger with each voice. "What are they doing?" demanded Science Director Veltar, his scanners detecting energy fluctuations throughout the facility. Serenai's scales shifted to patterns of deep concentration. "They are calling to the song, reaching out to all dragons everywhere. The young ones are asking their people to witness what happens here today." Elena felt a chill of anticipation as she realized the implications. "They're broadcasting to other dragon survivors?" "To every dragon that lives," Thanador confirmed, his own voice joining the growing chorus. "Let all who hear know what the collective truly is. A society that destroys children because they refuse to become slaves." The view screen suddenly split, additional communication channels opening as other voices joined the transmission. Elena gasped as she saw dozens of dragon faces appearing on the display, adults and young alike, their scales shimmering with shared emotion as they witnessed the confrontation. "Impossible." breathed Admiral Zekthor, his confidence wavering as the scope of the Dragon network became apparent. Our intelligence indicated only a handful of survivors at most. An elderly dragon with scales that sparkled like starlight spoke from one of the communication channels. Admiral of the Insect People, I am Elder Morvaindel, keeper of the deep memory. For 300 years we have hidden in the spaces between worlds, rebuilding our numbers and preparing for the day when we could reclaim our place in the galaxy. That day has arrived. Elena watched in amazement as more and more dragon voices joined the transmission. They came from asteroid mining colonies, from research stations in unexplored sectors, from hidden settlements on dead worlds that the galactic community had written off as uninhabitable. The dragons hadn't just survived, they had thrived in secret, growing stronger while the rest of the galaxy believed them extinct. We are no longer the victims of your wars, continued Elder Morvaindel. We are a free people with the right to exist. These hatchlings you seek to murder are under our protection, as are the humans who chose to defend them when their own lives were at stake. Admiral Zekthor's compound eyes darted between the multiple screens, calculating odds that were rapidly shifting out of his favor. The collective will not be intimidated by terrorist threats. We have 12 combat vessels against your scattered civilians. Do you? Asked Thondeor mildly. As if on cue, Rodriguez's sensors began detecting new contacts throughout the system. Ships materialized from behind asteroids and gas giant moons, sleek vessels unlike anything in the galactic databases, their hulls shimmering with the same iridescent patterns that decorated dragon scales. 37 dragon vessels and counting, Rodriguez reported with awe. They've been here the whole time, just waiting. Elena felt the hatchling in her arm shift, its scales brightening to hopeful golds and greens as it sensed the presence of its people. Around the laboratory, the other young dragons were singing with renewed vigor, their voices joining the galactic chorus that was growing stronger by the moment. But it was what happened next that truly changed everything. Captain Torres's voice crackled over the communications system with barely contained excitement. Doc, you need to hear this. We're receiving messages of support from across human space, the medical corps, the merchant fleet, even some government officials. Word of what you did here is spreading, and people are demanding protection for the dragons. Elena's breath caught as she realized the implications. Humans throughout the galaxy were rallying to support creatures they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. The story of the abandoned hatchlings was resonating with something fundamental in human nature, the instinct to protect the innocent and defend the helpless. This is Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force, a new voice announced, and Elena started in surprise at hearing her nurse's surname. The Admiral continued, Any hostile action against the medical vessel Hippocrates or the beings under their protection will be considered an act of war against the Terran Federation. More voices joined the transmission, Centauri trade representatives, even some Zephyrian scientists who were horrified by their government's actions. The simple act of one human doctor refusing to abandon her patients was creating ripples that spread across the galaxy. Science Director Veltar stepped forward, removing his rank insignia in a gesture that Elena recognized as formal dissent. Admiral Zekthor, I formally request permission to defect to the human medical mission. These creatures represent the greatest scientific discovery in galactic history. Their destruction would be an unconscionable waste. Veltar, you are committing treason against the collective. No, the old scientist replied calmly. I am choosing science over politics, knowledge over fear. These dragons offer us a chance to understand consciousness itself, the very essence of what makes a being truly alive. Elena felt the weight of history as she looked around the laboratory. The hatchlings were no longer dying. They were strong and alert, their scales bright with health and hope. The adult dragons stood proud and unafraid, their people's scattered fleets positioned throughout the system. And humans across the galaxy were declaring their support for creatures they had never seen, simply because compassion demanded it. Admiral, Elena addressed Zekthor directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had looked death in the eye and refused to blink. You have a choice. You can be remembered as the officer who started a war by trying to murder children, or you can be the one who helped forge a new alliance that will benefit every species in the galaxy. The small hatchling in her arms lifted its head and looked directly at the view screen, its golden eyes meeting Admiral Zekthor's compound gaze. For a long moment, the dragon child simply stared at the Zephyrian officer, its scales shifting through a complex pattern that seemed to convey both forgiveness and hope. When the hatchling finally made its musical sound, a simple, clear note that resonated with pure innocence, Elena saw something change in Admiral Zekthor's expression. The predatory gleam faded from his eyes, replaced by something that might have been shame. "Fleet, stand down," the Admiral ordered quietly. "All ships assume defensive positions only." Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she realized what had just happened. A war had been prevented not by weapons or threats, but by the simple power of a child's trust. The dragons had shown the galaxy something it had forgotten, that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the courage to protect. Thandor's scales shifted to patterns of deep respect as he addressed Elena directly. "Dr. Vasquez, you have done more than save our children's lives. You have shown us that there are still species worthy of trust, worthy of friendship. The dragons will not forget this debt." As the hatchlings continued their joyful songs and the assembled fleets maintained their peaceful formation, Elena realized that this moment would be remembered as the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history, an alliance forged not through conquest or negotiation, but through the simple recognition that all conscious beings deserved compassion and protection. The age of isolation was ending and the age of cooperation was about to begin. 6 months after the confrontation at Research Station Kepler, 442b, Elena stood on the observation deck of the newly christened Harmony Station, watching dragon hatchlings play in specially designed chambers that allowed them to practice their flying skills. The small dragon she had first cradled in the laboratory, who had chosen the name Aria for herself, swooped past the viewport with graceful loops, her scales shimmering with joy as she chased her clutchmates through the zero-gravity environment. "Dr. Elena," Aria's voice came through the communication system, now fluent in Galactic Standard after months of accelerated learning. "Watch this new maneuver," Elena smiled as the young dragon executed a complex spiral that ended with her hovering perfectly still, her forearms extended for balance while her gossamer wings beat in precise rhythm. Around her, the other hatchlings attempted to copy the move with varying degrees of success, their laughter creating musical harmonies that had become the soundtrack of the new station. "Remarkable progress," observed Dr. Okafor, joining Elena at the viewport. His medical scanners now contained detailed profiles of dragon physiology, the result of months of collaborative research between human and dragon scientists. "Their development rate is extraordinary when they're not being suppressed by neural inhibitors." The door to the observation deck hissed open, and Thanador entered with the flowing grace that Elena had learned to associate with dragon elders. His scales displayed patterns of contentment and pride as he watched the young ones play. "The little ones adapt quickly to their new freedom," he said, settling his massive form beside Elena's much smaller frame. "Aria speaks of you often in the song. She calls you her first mother, the one who gave her hope when darkness surrounded her." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. The bond between her and the young dragons had only grown stronger over the months, and she had found herself becoming an unofficial ambassador between human and dragon cultures. She's special, isn't she? There's something different about the way she processes information. "Indeed," Thandor agreed, his voice carrying harmonics of deep respect. "Aria shows signs of becoming a bridge singer, one who can facilitate communication between species. Such individuals are rare even among our people, born perhaps once in a generation." Through the viewport, Elena watched as Aria suddenly stopped her aerial play and approached the observation window. The young dragon's scales shifted to questioning patterns as she tilted her head, studying something beyond Elena's range of vision. "There's a ship approaching," Aria announced through the comm system. "It feels familiar, but different, like the insect people, but sadder?" Elena's medical alert system chimed and she accessed the station's external sensors. A single Zephyrian vessel was indeed approaching. not a military ship, but a medical frigate bearing the insignia of the collective's research division. More surprisingly, it was transmitting Elena's personal communication codes. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez of Harmony Station," she responded to the ship's hail. "Please identify yourself and state your purpose." The view screen activated, revealing a familiar face. Science Director Veltar, who had defected during the confrontation 6 months ago, appeared on the display. His compound eyes showed signs of strain, and his movements suggested exhaustion. "Dr. Vasquez, I request emergency medical assistance. I have 12 Zephyrian civilians aboard, researchers and their families who have been exposed to a rare neural virus. Our own medical capabilities are insufficient to treat the condition." Elena felt Thanador tense beside her, old instincts warning against trusting their former captors. But her medical training overrode any personal reservations. "What are the symptoms?" she asked, already moving toward the medical bay. "Progressive neural degradation leading to loss of cognitive function and eventual death." Veltar replied grimly. "The virus specifically targets the synaptic pathways that govern higher reasoning. We estimate 72 hours before irreversible brain damage occurs." Elena paused, a terrible realization dawning. "Director Veltar, this virus, is it related to the neural suppressants used on the dragon hatchlings?" The Zephyrian scientist's silence was answer enough. Elena felt rage building in her chest, but she forced it down. Whatever mistakes had been made, there were innocent lives at stake now. "Bring them aboard," she ordered. "Bay 7 is equipped for xenobiological quarantine. Dr. Cub, prepare for emergency neural surgery protocols." As the Zephyrian ship docked with Harmony Station, Elena found herself facing an ethical dilemma that would have been unthinkable months ago. The species that had tried to enslave the dragons was now asking for help from the very beings they had attempted to destroy. Thandor's scales shifted through complex patterns as he processed the situation through the song. "This virus, it is connected to their crimes against our young?" "Probably," Elena admitted. "Neural suppressants work by blocking specific brain pathways. If they've been experimenting with more aggressive versions, they might have created something that backfired." The Dragon Elder's expression was unreadable. "And you intend to help them despite this?" Elena met his gaze directly. "I'm a doctor. I treat everyone who needs help, regardless of what they've done. The question is whether your people can accept that." Arya's voice suddenly came through the communication system, her tone serious despite her youth. "Keeper Thanador, the little ones wish to help the sick insect people. We feel their pain in the song, even though they cannot sing properly. Pain is pain, regardless of who suffers it." Elena looked through the viewport to see all 12 of the rescued hatchlings floating in their exercise chamber, their scales displaying patterns of concern and determination. They had voted as a group to offer their assistance, despite everything the Zephyrians had done to them. Thanador's scales shifted to deep blues and purples, colors Elena had learned indicated profound thought. After several long minutes, he nodded slowly. "If our young ones can find compassion for those who tortured them, then perhaps we elders can learn from their wisdom. What do you need from us?" Elena felt her heart swell with pride and gratitude. Neural mapping data. The dragon's telepathic abilities might give us insights into brain function that our technology can't provide. And if the hatchlings are willing, their own recovery from neural suppression could provide the key to reversing the damage. The next 18 hours stretched Elena's medical skills to their absolute limit. The Zephyrian patients were indeed suffering from an aggressive neural virus that bore disturbing similarities to the suppressants used on the dragons. Worse, the virus was adaptive, evolving to counter each treatment Elena attempted. It was Arya who provided the breakthrough. The young dragon spent hours studying the brain scans of the infected Zephyrians, her scales shifting through rapid color changes as she processed information at speeds that amazed even Elena. "The virus thinks like the suppressants," Arya finally announced, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of youth. "It tries to cut connections between thoughts, but if you approach it like a song instead of a disease, you can teach the brain to sing around the broken parts." Elena stared at the young dragon in amazement. You're suggesting we use neural harmonics to create new pathways around the damaged areas? Yes, Arya's scales brightened to excited golds. The other hatchlings and I did something similar when we fought against the suppressants. We can show the insect people's brains how to heal themselves. What followed was the most extraordinary medical procedure Elena had ever attempted. Using a combination of human technology, dragon telepathic abilities, and the hatchlings' own experiences with neural recovery, they began teaching the Zephyrian patients' brains to literally rewire themselves around the viral damage. The process required the dragon hatchlings to establish temporary telepathic contact with the Zephyrian patients, something that should have been impossible given their completely different neural architectures. But the young dragons approached the challenge with the fearless creativity of children who had never been told that something couldn't be done. Elena watched in wonder as Arya placed her small clawed hand on the forehead of a young Zephyrian researcher, her scales glowing with soft golden light. The patient's brain activity immediately began showing new neural pathways forming, connections sparking to life where the virus had severed them. "It's working," Dr. Okafor reported with awe. "The dragons are actually teaching the Zephyrian brains how to heal themselves. Neural activity is normalizing across all patients." As the hours passed, Elena found herself witnessing something unprecedented in galactic medicine. The dragon hatchlings, working in carefully coordinated groups, managed to reverse the viral damage in all 12 patients. More importantly, they did so with a level of compassion and dedication that left even the Zephyrian doctors speechless with gratitude. When the last patient was declared stable, Science Director Veltar approached Elena with obvious emotion in his compound eyes. "Dr. Vasquez, how can we possibly repay this debt? You and the dragons saved our lives despite everything we did to harm their children." Elena looked around the medical bay, where dragon hatchlings were sharing nutrient pouches with recovering Zephyrian patients, their musical laughter mixing with the clicking conversations of their former captors. The scene would have been impossible to imagine just months ago. "You can repay it by helping us build something better," she said simply. "The galaxy doesn't have to be about who's stronger or smarter or more technologically advanced. It can be about who's willing to help when help is needed." Arya floated over to Elena, her young face bright with exhaustion and pride. "First Mother, did we do well? The insect people's songs are much clearer now." Elena gathered the small dragon into a gentle embrace, marveling once again at the courage and compassion contained in such a young heart. "You did wonderfully, Arya. You all did. You've shown the galaxy what it means to be truly civilized." As Elena looked around the medical bay at dragons and Zephyrians working together, at human doctors learning from alien wisdom, at former enemies becoming friends through shared purpose, she realized that they had achieved something far greater than saving a few lives. They had proven that compassion was not weakness but the strongest force in the universe, capable of bridging any gap, healing any wound, and transforming enemies into family. The galaxy would never be the same, and Elena couldn't imagine it any other way. In the months that followed, Harmony Station would become the first truly integrated research facility in galactic history, where humans, dragons, and reformed Zephyrians would work together to unlock the mysteries of consciousness and connection. The dragon hatchlings would grow into powerful advocates for interspecies cooperation, their unique perspective bridging gaps between species that had seemed impossible to cross. And Elena Vasquez would continue to practice the medicine she had always believed in, the kind that saw not species or politics or ancient grievances, but simply living beings in need of care. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human, the stubborn refusal to let suffering go unanswered, and the endless capacity to find family among the stars. Galactic aliens left their dragon hatchlings to perish until a human doctor rescued them. HFY Sci-Fi.